The sun was sliding low over the dusty plains when the cowboy rode into the valley, a lone figure framed in gold light, his horse's hooves stirring small clouds of silence. He'd been riding for days, following the faint trail of hoofprints that led nowhere and everywhere at once. Hunger gnawed at him, not for food but for something unnamed, peace, maybe, or forgiveness. The land stretched wide and empty, whispering old songs of battles and broken promises. As he dismounted near a dry creek, he noticed movement ahead, a figure on the ground, crawling slowly, as if the earth itself was pulling her down. He squinted, hand resting on the grip of his revolver, but when she lifted her head, his hand fell away. She wasn't a threat. She was young, proud even in weakness, her skin marked by the sun, her eyes sharp like a hawk's even through exhaustion. Feathers swayed from her hair, beads glimmered faintly against her chest, and her breath came fast, as if she'd been running from something or someone. He stepped closer. "You all right, ma'am?" he asked quietly. No answer came, only the rasp of her breath and the trembling of her hand as she tried to rise. She looked at him not with fear but with defiance, and for a long moment their gazes locked. Two worlds that had once clashed now meeting in the silence of survival. Finally she spoke, her voice low, heavy with pride. "I don't need your help." The cowboy frowned. "You look like you could use some water at least." He untied his canteen and offered it to her, but she stared at it as though it were a test. Slowly she took it, drinking just enough to wet her lips, then pushed it back. "I'm not hungry for your food," she said, her tone steady. "I'm hungry for justice." He didn't understand at first, and she didn't explain. She stood, brushing dust from her arms, and the wind carried the scent of sage between them. She wore a deerskin dress torn at the shoulder, her necklace of bones and beads catching the dying sunlight. Something about her strength unsettled him. She was alone yet unafraid. The cowboy had seen many people broken by this land, miners, settlers, drifters, but she was different. She didn't bend. She burned quietly, like a coal that refused to die. He followed her eyes to the horizon, where smoke curled faintly in the distance. "Are you looking for someone?" he asked. "I'm looking for the men who burned my village," she said flatly. "They took everything. My people, my brother." The cowboy shifted uneasily. "And you think I can help you find them?" "I don't think," she said, stepping closer. "I know." He studied her for a long time. There was no fear in her, only purpose. Cold, cutting purpose. Something stirred inside him, something old. Maybe guilt, maybe memory. "All right," he said finally, "but you'll follow my lead. The land gets mean after sundown." She nodded once, and without another word, they began to walk side by side through the dust and silence. Hours passed as shadows stretched long over the desert. She told him little, but he learned to read her silence. Every time her hand brushed the knife at her side, he saw the ghost of her brother's death reflected in her eyes. When the moon rose, they made camp by a cluster of rocks. She sat apart from the fire, staring into the distance while he cooked beans over the flame. "You ever killed a man?" she asked suddenly. He hesitated. "Yes," he said after a pause. "Too many?" "Then you understand," she murmured, and turned her gaze back to the darkness. They spoke little more that night, but something shifted in the quiet, an unspoken understanding, a fragile alliance born not of trust but of need. When he finally closed his eyes, he dreamt of flames and screams, and of a woman standing alone in the smoke, her face the same as hers. When dawn broke, she was already awake, crouched at the edge of camp, tracing symbols in the dirt with a stick. He watched her silently. There was something hauntingly graceful about the way she moved, strong but deliberate, like the earth itself listened when she breathed. She turned to him and said, "We ride east." That's where they went. He didn't ask how she knew. He saddled up and followed. By midday they reached the ridge. Below, a small settlement shimmered in the heat. The woman's eyes narrowed. "That's where they are." He knew what she meant. The men she hunted were not outlaws. They were soldiers, men wearing badges that made their crimes invisible. "You can't take them alone," he said. "I'm not alone," she replied, and before he could stop her, she started down the slope. He swore under his breath, grabbed his rifle, and followed. The air was thick with dust and tension. When they reached the edge of the settlement, the cowboy could feel the danger pressing against his chest. But the woman didn't hesitate. She walked straight into the open, every step steady, fearless. The men turned, surprised, then laughed when they saw her, until she raised her knife. He raised his gun, covering her flank. What followed was fast, brutal, and wordless. A storm of vengeance. When it was over, smoke rose again, and she stood breathing hard, blood on her hands and tears in her eyes. The cowboy said nothing. He knew better. As the sun sank behind them, she looked back at him and said quietly, "Now you know what I was hungry for." He nodded slowly. "Revenge never fills you," he said. She met his eyes, steady, unwavering. "Maybe not," she whispered. "But it stops the hunger from eating you alive." They rode away together, the desert swallowing the sound of hooves behind them. The desert wind howled that night, carrying with it the echoes of what they had done. Neither of them spoke as their horses moved through the open plain, their shadows stretching long beneath the moonlight. The cowboy's thoughts were heavy, but hers were fire, burning through every breath, every heartbeat. He could feel it radiating from her, that raw, untamed hunger that had nothing to do with survival anymore. It was something deeper, darker, something that neither revenge nor forgiveness could quiet. When they finally stopped by a dry canyon to rest, she dismounted without a word and walked to the edge, staring into the endless dark. He watched her from behind, unsure if he should speak. "You got what you came for," he said softly. "But your eyes still look empty." She didn't turn. "Justice isn't what people think it is," she murmured. "You get it, and then it leaves you hollow, like you traded your soul for a piece of quiet that never lasts." He tossed a pebble into the dust. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I know that feeling too well." For a moment, neither moved. Then she looked at him, her expression softer than before. "You carry ghosts," she said. "I can see it." He gave a dry chuckle. "Ghosts don't ride horses," he muttered. "But they sure know how to keep a man awake." The fire between them flickered, the silence thick with things unsaid. He wanted to tell her about the war, about the towns he'd burned under orders, about the faces that haunted him when he closed his eyes, faces that looked a lot like hers. But he didn't. Instead, he said, "You should rest. We'll reach the border by morning." She shook her head. "You're leaving, aren't you?" He didn't answer right away. "You don't need me anymore," he said finally. "Your fight's done." Her gaze didn't waver. "My fight ended the moment they died. But the hunger didn't. You think you ride alone, cowboy. But you don't. You're starving too, just for something you can't name." Her words cut deeper than he expected. He stood up, restless. "You don't know me," he said. She smiled faintly. "I didn't have to." The fire cracked between them, sparks rising like tiny stars before vanishing into the night. He looked at her, really looked at her, and realized how much she reminded him of everything he'd lost. Not a woman, not a name, but the part of himself that had believed he could still do something right. Maybe that was why he couldn't walk away. Not yet. By dawn, they were riding again. The landscape shifted from dry flats to jagged stone. They followed the riverbed until they reached a small canyon camp where travelers sometimes stopped. Smoke rose from a dying fire. Someone had been there not long ago. The cowboy dismounted first, scanning the ground. "Tracks," he said. 3 men, maybe 4. Her jaw tightened. "You said they were gone." "They are," he replied. "These aren't soldiers. Bandits, maybe." Before he could say more, a bullet cracked through the air, hitting the ground near her feet. She dove for cover, rolling behind a rock, while he dropped to one knee and fired back. The echo roared across the canyon. Dust filled the air. He caught a glimpse of movement, 3 shadows darting along the ridge. Another shot rang out, and he felt it graze his arm. Pain burned hot, but he ignored it, reloading fast. When the noise finally faded, 2 of the bandits lay still, and the 3rd was running. The woman stood, her chest rising and falling with fury. Without hesitation, she ran after him. "Wait!" the cowboy shouted, but she didn't stop. He cursed under his breath and followed. The chase led them through the narrow canyon, the man stumbling ahead, desperate. When she caught him, she didn't speak. She struck quick and clean, her knife flashing in the morning sun. It was over in seconds. The cowboy caught up just as she stood over the man's body, breathing hard. Her eyes were wet, but her hands didn't shake. He reached for her shoulder. He was just another scavenger, he said gently. Not the kind you're fighting. She turned toward him, her face raw with emotion. It doesn't matter, she said hoarsely. The hunger doesn't know the difference anymore. He didn't argue. He knew she was right. Some hungers were born from loss so deep that nothing could fill them, not revenge, not justice, not even peace. They sat by the river afterward, both silent. The water was shallow, reflecting the endless blue sky. For the first time she looked tired, not in body but in spirit. He took off his hat and set it beside him. You ever thought about stopping? He asked. About finding something to live for instead of fight for? She smiled faintly, almost sadly. Maybe, she said, but when you lose everything, you start thinking maybe you were meant to keep fighting. That's what keeps you breathing. He stared at the water, then said, maybe you're right, but one day fighting turns into running, and you forget what started it all. The wind stirred between them again, warm and dry. For a long time neither spoke. Then she said quietly, you could stay. You don't have to ride alone. He looked at her, and for a heartbeat he wanted to say yes, to stay, to stop wandering, but he knew himself too well. I wouldn't bring peace, he said, only trouble. She reached out and touched his arm lightly. Then at least don't ride away hungry. Their eyes met, the silence between them heavy with understanding. For once there were no words left to say. When he finally stood, she did too. The moment stretched, fragile, perfect, fleeting. Then he turned, mounted his horse, and tipped his hat. As he rode away, the wind carried her voice softly behind him. Someday, cowboy, she called, you'll know what your hunger really is. He didn't look back. The desert swallowed his silhouette, the same way it swallowed stories and sins and everything that refused to die. But long after he was gone, her words stayed, echoing through him like a promise, like a wound that refused to heal. And far on the horizon, the sun began to rise again, burning gold through the dust. A new day, but the same hunger, waiting for them both in the silence of the wild.